thank you, host. Like I said earlier, um, and I'm just going to restart my remarks. Joe Kunzler here. Just that I'm a huge supporter of community transit, huge supporter of Northgate Link, but I would prefer a direct ride from Everett Station at 8:30 in the morning, which is when my scheduled transit gets in, and ends at having to transfer to another bus. That is a problem. I think part of the problem is Everett Transit needs to merge with community transit, and for the sake of civility, let's just end my comments there, if that's okay with everyone.
Thank you, Mr. Kunstler. We appreciate your comments.
I also submitted written comments, by the way.
On the public hearing?
No, sir.
Oh, okay. Just general written comments then.
General comments, sir.
Okay, thank you. All right. Is there anybody else who wishes to speak to the public hearing with regards to the Northgate Link restructural proposal? Okay. We will close the public hearing then. Staff, do you have any comments on this item? Okay. Rachel, we're safe to move forward then and call to order the regular meeting agenda. Is that correct?
Yes, please proceed, Chair.
Okay. We'll call to order the regular meeting agenda, and we will open public comment then for our regular meeting. And Mr. Kunstler has submitted written comment. And we will now open it up. Does anybody wish to offer any verbal comment during this portion of the meeting?
Mr. Chairman, I can read into the record my comments. That might be better
Okay.
for everyone.
Sounds good.
Yeah, we're having some technical. First, thank you for getting recording going. I appreciate your help, Mr. Chairman. I know some of the staff don't like it, but we do have open government in this state. We do have open government laws that need to be complied with. And if you can't handle that, you don't need to work in government. Sorry if I was a bit of an edge, but a couple quick ideas. I think that people of color should be consulted on fair enforcement and other elements of transit policing. I generally support law enforcement. I generally support fair enforcement. I think it's only fair that if we're going to have transit funded by fares, that everyone have their fare checked in equitable and fair manner. And I hope that groups of color, unlike me, are allowed to. I do really appreciate these online meetings very, very much. I think they're a precious tool for the public. They reduce emissions traveling on the road. They allow staff to work from home, board members to work from home. And I appreciate the volunteerism of the board members and the professionalism of staff on most issues. I believe, as they say in the West Wing, decisions are made by those who show up, end quote. It's from my fundamental creed, the foundation of my patriotism. And I just want to have more diverse voices heard than just me. I think everyone right about now wishes they could mute me. But with that, thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. You're a good man. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kunstler, and we appreciate your passion for transit, and we appreciate your comments. Does anybody else wish to speak? Okay. We will close down that portion of the meeting then. And I will note that our CEO, Emmett Heath, had every intention of attending today, but it sounds like he has a new grandchild on the way. And so I told him that we would be pretty upset if he attended a community transit board meeting instead of going with his wife to that event. So was anybody going to give the CEO report, Rachel, in Emmett's stead?
Yes, Chair. It will be Director Roland Behe.
Okay. We'll recognize you then, Director Behe.
Thank you, Chair Nearing. Yes, and Emmett very much wanted to be here, but clearly there are larger events happening today, so we wish him and his family well. As we have started we'll continue today with our practice of providing a monthly update on agency response to the COVID-19 crisis. So I'm going to provide updates in a number of key areas. We'll keep comments brief. And then following those initial comments, Director Jerry Beardsley and myself will provide a tag team on a financial update as well. So we'll get started here. Beginning with ridership. Ridership overall on the system continues to be down about 70% as it has since the pandemic began. We've now passed the 2 million mark in terms of overall ridership loss. And that's distributed about 1.6 million community transit boardings and over 600,000 sound transit boardings. We're also hearing from customers. Many of them are complimenting our service and our drivers, really appreciating the service the agency continues to provide during these difficult times, serving many of our essential workers in the community. There's also challenges. We're definitely hearing from customers about lack of reliability on the system, things that happen beyond our control. For example, I-5 shutting down. I think we've all been tracking recent events in the community, and those events have impact on our transportation network. Transit is likewise subject to lack of predictability in that regard and has a negative impact on our customers. We are really working hard to earn our customers' trust, trying to respond and communicate quickly with them despite the challenging circumstances. Pivoting to overall service levels, we continue to operate at approximately 70% service level as compared with the level of service that we operated prior to the COVID-19 crisis. We have been working diligently to determine how will we begin to restore service and figuring out what is a sustainable level of service given what we know today about both the level of demand on the system from a ridership perspective as well as affordability of service given the economic conditions. The next steps will be an increase in service restoring to approximately a 75% of pre-COVID levels. That increase will happen on July 6th. Following that, later in the year on September 20th, we will further increase service an additional 10% to approximately 85% of pre-COVID service levels. And those are weekday service levels. So a two-step process, initially restoring to 75% of pre-COVID levels, and then subsequent to that, restoring to 85%. This level of service, we feel right now, will allow us to absorb the return of ridership on the system as it grows in coming months, as the state reopens and as people get back to work in the community. We're very mindful of the need to continue accommodating social distancing on the vehicles, and so right now we feel that 85% service level is appropriate given what we know today. About future ridership growth. Moving to operational matters, I think everybody is aware that we started collecting fares on the SWIFT system again beginning Monday, beginning of this week, June 1st. Reminder to everyone that SWIFT riders pay fare at SWIFT stations, so this is different than the rest of the system. There is no fare box on the bus. This is part of why we were able to return to fare collection on SWIFT prior to the rest of the system, because riders are paying at the station rather than on the vehicle. There are some early signs this week that this has gone well, and we are hearing from operational staff as well as monitoring ridership numbers, and so early indications are that things are going smoothly so far. We're also extremely close to making a final decision on full restoration of fares throughout the bus system. The earliest this would happen would be July 1st. A reminder that we initially suspended fare collection for purposes of safety and ensuring both customer and driver safety on the system. and return to fairs is likewise heavily predicated on safety measures being in place. We're currently working very closely with coach operators as well as with the ATU in determining what that will look like when we do return to fare collection and what the operational measures will be that will make that safe. So we'll continue to provide updates on that as that work moves forward. We're also continuing to evaluate face shields and barriers on the vehicles, and likewise involving driver input in that process. Regarding personal protective equipment, there's a WISTA ordered delivery of masks that has arrived at the agency. We also understand that we have an order from FDA headquarters that is currently in transit to the agency as well. And we have a multi-year supply of personal protective equipment on hand. We're also tracking very closely the new governor's face covering guidance that is effective next Monday, June 8th. A lot of coordination going on right now internally with our incident command structure, leadership at the agency, as well as coordinating with L&I. We will be communicating this order and tracking compliance as we move into next week. In terms of COVID-19 cases, the safety measures that we've implemented continue to be effective, and I'll just note that the last positive test that the agency had was back on April 1st, and we have had none since then. Number of updates in terms of customer and community engagement. We had shared earlier that there was a high priority on checking in with customers and with the community in terms of concerns, attitudes, information about their future travel plans and comfort with returning to transit. We have completed our first round of surveying in this effort, hoping to learn more soon about riders' needs and concerns, and have been able to look at some of the early returns from that survey work. We had good participation from riders and non-riders in that effort. You also may be aware of a new public service announcement that was done in cooperation with Sound Transit, King County Metro, and Pierce Transit. I think you've all been emailed a link to that PSA. There was a pop-up event, outreach event for non-destination riders. Just a bit to explain that term, these are riders that have been on our transit system for purposes of sheltering and have not had a specific destination in mind as they ride our system. There was a specific outreach event to non-destination riders at Everett Station on the 20th. More than 60 people were contacted during a multi-agency outreach effort. There were health screenings, connections to housing and food resources, and hygiene kits. We were in partnership with the Snohomish Health District, with City of Everett, both Everett Transit and the Safe Street team members, as well as Snohomish County Emergency Management, Human Services, and the Sheriff's Office. And that event went very well, very good participation. Turning to our employee engagement efforts, our telework policy, whereby many of our particularly administrative staff are now working remotely, will continue until at least July 6th. There is a very significant return to base effort underway, interdisciplinary team that is working on how to ensure a safe environment for all employees when we do return to base. And we'll be sharing more information about that as it becomes available. We're also starting to dial back some of our human resource policy changes that were implemented during the height of the crisis. They were intended to be short-term, and as it is deemed appropriate, we are beginning to dial some of those back. Some examples include on-call and standby policies, premium pay, and others. We've also begun to identify staffing levels needed to sustain the 85% service level that I referred to previously. We will not be returning to 100% of the pre-COVID-19 service levels until at least March of 2021. which means that we do have more drivers on hand than are needed right now. As Emmett shared via email with you and with the executive committee last week, we need to move forward with reducing coach operator positions to match staffing levels that are needed for the level of service. Cesar Portillo, Director of Employee Engagement. I have a problem with my screen here. Cesar Portillo, Director of Employee Engagement, and Sarah Burnett, the Labor Relations Manager, as well as Steve Kim, Director of Transportation, have regular calls with ATU leadership. This happens multiple times per week, and they are right now coordinating on working out the details on the reduction in force related to the adjustment in service levels. So more to come on that. Our promise from the start has been to focus on minimizing the amount of employee impact as we continue to provide essential services that our community needs. We're trying to maintain financial stability in this uncertain time and place the agency in a position to recover earlier and stronger. More will come as we continue to work through the process of balancing the financial strategies, workforce, and the service. Those conclude my preliminary remarks on our COVID-19 efforts. So at this point, I'm going to hand it over to Jerry Beardsley, Director of Administration. And Jerry will build on the presentation that she provided at the May board meeting. And we'll both work through the presentation and providing an update on our financial strategy.
Thank you, Roland. And Rachel, thanks for putting up the PowerPoint. So let me just make one adjustment. Bear with me for a second. Okay, so thank you all for being here. Wish we could see each other in person. This will be one of our monthly updates. As you know, we're providing updates at both the Finance Committee and this committee. And as things evolve, there will be some new items that the Finance Committee hasn't heard. But we'll catch you all up here. I want to provide a little bit of context, refresh on where we were, and then between Roland and I, we'll talk about where we are now and how we got there. If you recall from the last month's briefing, we were focused primarily on the revenue side. We were so early into the COVID-19 response, we knew that March and April would likely be some pretty big hits to revenue, as many of you are experiencing or expecting in your jurisdictions. So we looked at some models and started looking at what would we do if there was a rapid recovery, a slow recovery. We had done some early work on cost reduction, but knew that we needed to do more work on the expenditure side of the equation. Two other points before I go to the next slide. Just a reminder all the way through this presentation that we are not trying to solve all of the problems at one time in this first effort. We think we've come pretty close to filling a long-term revenue gap, and that's with a series of cost management strategies, and we'll walk you through those. But I just want you to kind of keep in mind that we see this as evolving as we get more information. Just like last time, these slides have more text and numbers than I think we would typically want to put on a slide, but it's because we want the document to be able to stand alone for those people who are not looking at the screen and don't have access to the PowerPoint. It is available on our website. Rachel, next slide, please. Thank you. So this is a slide some of you have seen before. We use it during our new board member orientation. And really the point of this is to focus on the boxes and the flow of the arrows. These are 2020 adopted numbers. They're not updated for current, but the gist of it is we get revenue in two different ways, through capital grant revenue and operating revenue. And there are a variety of different sources. I won't go into those details. But really what we wanted you to see is kind of how the money flows. So the operating revenue is split primarily into our operations, but also goes into our capital program and then also to our reserves. The reason that's important, and we want to point that out to you, is as we're looking at adjustments on our expenditure side of the equation, we're looking at all three of those areas, our reserves, our operations, and our capital program, making adjustments in all of those areas, and you'll see examples of that in just a minute. The box on the very bottom has to do with our statutory obligations for both debt and our statutory requirements for workers' compensation. Next slide, Rachel. Thank you. So this is just a real quick reminder of where we were. We had a lot of unknowns: sales tax revenue, depth and duration of the recession, changes in customer behavior, the need for safety measures was another example. So we'll walk you through where we have a little more information and have made some decisions in those areas. I'm not going to dwell on this for too long. We have some numbers on the slide that show what we had projected for both for the year and then 2021 and out. We have now received March spending revenue, so we'll go into those details in another slide. Roland, do you want to go to the next slide?
Sure. Yeah, so we've kind of called this our good news, bad news chart, but this is really an update. You may recall from Jerry's initial presentation last month that we were highlighting the gap between our previously adopted transit development plan, which goes out through 2024 for the plan you adopted last year, and then we're now planning for the 2025 horizon, 6 years out. It highlighted the gap between previously forecast revenues and this new reality in terms of the lower sales tax revenue as well as our fare revenue due to decreased ridership. We have translated that previous tabular information into this graph to make it easier to show the changes. And just to briefly explain, the chart is really showing one of the key metrics that we're using to measure success, and that is our year-end unrestricted cash balance. So this is the cash on hand that is not required via policy in our reserves. And it's another way to look at it is it's what represents our capacity for future service expansion and sustainability. The initially adopted plan and the under the previous revenue forecast is the black line on the chart, and so that's listed as the updated transit development plan pre-COVID economy. The red line at the bottom of the chart illustrates how that year-end cash changed dramatically as we began to understand the new revenue forecast for both sales tax and fares. And so you can see a dramatic difference and very rapidly moving into deficit territory. And Jerry was quick to assure and communicate last month that we would never allow that to develop. And so this is part of what our problem solving has been over the last weeks. The difference between those two lines is on the order of $300 million. So it gives a sense of scale over the 6-year period of the impact of this event, and that's under the slow recovery forecast that we're working with. So we've made a lot of progress in recent weeks, and what I want to highlight are the two green lines. We talked earlier about the 85% service level that we have determined is appropriate right now, given our understanding of ridership demand on the system as well as the affordability of service moving forward. And so the bold green line that's the lower of the two on your chart illustrates the year-end cash on hand as it develops over that 6-year period, with the cost savings associated with that lower service level, as well as a number of other financial strategies that we will, that Jerry and I will describe as we move through the presentation. And to Jerry's point at the beginning, we're not looking to solve 100% of this problem with this initial set of strategies. Key reason for that is we do not know that we're on that slow growth path or the more rapid recovery path. And we really need to determine that before taking more significant steps. But the important information is to say that this represents tremendous progress over where we were a month ago. And you can see that while it's not completely above the $0 line in this chart, we have significantly extended the period of time before we reach that deficit situation, and the depth of that deficit has been substantially reduced with this initial set of strategies. The other line I'll point out is the rapid recovery line, which is the dashed green line at the top of the chart. And it shows a much more positive balance developing, in fact, significantly exceeding what had previously been in our transit development plan. Just to note that likewise, we would never continue to recommend that path. Once it became obvious that we were in a more rapid recovery situation, we would begin to immediately program back a higher level of service and address the needs of the community with a more full range of services available. So this is illustrative at this point to give a sense of the magnitude of impact we're having on that bottom line. I think with that, I'm ready for the next slide, Rachel. So this is another way of looking at the progress we have made. As I said, we were looking at something in the range of a $300 million gap over that 6-year period. And what we really wanted to show was the level of progress we've made in terms of how much of that gap we've been able to close. And in this chart, you can see that we've got over $280 million of that problem addressed through a number of strategies. And the other point of this chart is to explain the diversity or the balance of strategies we're using in order to get there. And we'll talk a little bit more about some of the details as we work through the presentation, but I wanted to highlight a number of things just working clockwise around the chart. The first thing we did was to say we were taking the expansion that had previously been programmed in that 6-year program off the table for the time being. And the dollar value of that is in excess of $80 million. We also, as we said, identified that 85% service level, so a 15% reduction over the pre-COVID service level as a key point in establishing a level of sustainability. And you can see the value of that over the 6-year period is projected at approximately $40 million. We've also worked hard to identify a series of one-time operational and capital program savings. These are early numbers. This work will continue, but the early number is in excess of $30 million of savings in one-time operating and capital program adjustments. We're also accounting for nearly $40 million in federal relief funding through the CARES Act. And we shared information about this last month, and you can see the magnitude of that in the yellow slice. And then finally, in freeing up the capacity that had been identified for future service expansion, we're helping to sustain the levels of service that we currently forecast through this 6-year period. And so that's this in excess of $80 million of one-time reserve spending, still allowing for acceptable balances in our key reserves, but largely expending what had been identified for future service expansion as a bridge strategy as we work through the revenue deficit in this scenario. Again, all of this is predicated on an assumption of the slow growth scenario. We will continue to refine and adjust these strategies as the recovery progresses and as we understand which of those revenue paths we're likely on. But main point in this information is to show progress, to show the balance in different strategies, to illustrate the extent to which we have resolved the financial deficit and have a fair degree of flexibility moving forward in terms of how we adjust these strategies either upward or downward.
Okay, so I think it's back to me. Rachel, will you stay on this slide for just a minute, though? I really like this pie chart. I think, to me, when Roland talks about it, illustrating kind of the balance between all of our different strategies, I like that visual, and we'll be talking about a couple of specific slices of that pie. So when you've heard Emmett speak repeatedly about how we have been able in the past years to build our reserves and to put ourselves in a very good position to weather an economic uncertainty or recession. What he's really talking about are a whole number of decisions, but most easily seen in this pie chart in that darker blue. That's about little over a quarter of the chart on the left side. So that's that last portion that Roland was talking about, the one-time reserves. And we'll get into some more specifics on all of these, but that's one of the specific pieces that we're talking about. When you combine that with the orange line just next to it, which is the CARES Act funding, That's a good more than 2/3 of our ability to address the economic the reduced revenue that we expect to see in either of our scenarios. You combine those with the one-time capital and operating reductions, you've got between those three just a third of the savings. So really, we have looked at a number of factors, but that reserve has really allowed us to use it as a buffer. We will rebuild, but as a buffer to get through the next couple of years. So with that, Rachel, if you go to the next slide. So one of the things we talked about last month but didn't share, I wanted to make sure it was in front of you and employees who may be watching this. We have been working with a set of guiding principles that really help us make sure that we do have a balanced decision in every decision we make. And just a couple of keys there. Safety continues to be a priority, whether it's the reserve for maintenance of vehicles and facilities, or whether and when we buy vehicles, what we invest in. Customer focus continues to be a high priority. In this situation, we wanted to minimize the impact to employees, and that's not always possible to maintain the same number of employees, but we are using that as a guide for us to at least soften the landing for some employees. Maintaining fiscal integrity is pretty consistent for us, but very important here as we do spend down reserves, for example. We need to be careful that we're maintaining at least an adequate level to accomplish what we need to. And then we just want to be nimble, be prepared to adjust to new information and emerge early. And you'll notice in there, be mindful of Prop 1 promises. That's been as Roland mentioned, we may be slower on delivering on those promises, but it's present every time we're making a decision. Next slide, Rachel. So when we talked last month, we had sales tax revenue. If you recall, we received that monthly. It reflects spending from 2 months prior. So we just received the May revenue, which reflects March spending. March was a month where we expected lower revenue, but it was it was kind of part way into when we went into the governor's stay home, stay healthy. But the good news from our perspective is that the revenue we received for May was higher than we had projected in either the rapid or the slow recovery. So I'm going to point you to the graph and how it works. If you see the several lines that form that top moving up line, they're green and blue, I think. That's our typical monthly revenue. There's always some variation. When we talk about annual revenue, we give you an average of those. So we were on a pretty good course until March. And when you see in the very middle of that graph, two lines, the red and the yellow, split off and then head downwards, those reflect our rapid and slow recovery scenarios. What the March spending, May revenue, has allowed us to do is to push that decline out so that when you look at the month of May, you can see that middle line that's horizontal, and that's really reflecting the better than projected revenue. I'm guessing your jurisdictions have experienced something similar in terms of your revenue and receipts, and hopefully they were similarly higher than projected. We feel like this is the kind of information we want to get because it will affect how we look at the two scenarios moving forward, and it gets back to that need to be somewhat flexible in terms of when we respond, how much we respond, and then how we go back and modify that response. Next slide, please, Rachel. So this should look familiar. We used this at the last board briefing. The green line is our adopted budget and our several years of a 6-year plan for the transit development plan. When we talked to you last month, we were projecting in 2020 a range. This is using the rapid recovery and the slow recovery. We're projecting a range of 16% decrease in sales tax revenue to up to 26% decrease in sales tax revenue. Because of the good returns for May, we're able to adjust that. So now long-term, we're looking at more of a range of 14 to 23%. And again, every time we're able to push that out, it reduces the gap of the problem we're trying to solve in the future. I will mention that based on what I saw from Sound Transit yesterday, they're looking at a similar % decline in May compared to the prior year month of May. I think we're kind of in line with what our peers are seeing. I'm going to turn it to Roland. He's going to give you a little more information on the updated service levels.
Next slide, Rachel.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, so as we mentioned earlier in the meeting, we're on this path for beginning to ladder back into our higher levels of service. And while we won't restore completely to the pre-COVID levels, we will make some significant progress from where we are today. And so the first thing I'll show in this chart, and this is a chart that illustrates both level of service as it is expressed in terms of annual service hours operated over a 12-month period. And then also superimposed on that in orange is a trend line that illustrates weekly ridership. So this is a 7-day look at ridership going all the way back to 2008. And I'll focus first on the right-hand side of the chart, the darker blue column. That gives you a sense of the order of magnitude of this laddering in terms of the current level today is about 65 to 70% of our pre-COVID service levels. And so that's what's identified there as that May 2020 service level in terms of annual hours operated. In July, we will step back to a 75% service level. And then the top of that column is the anticipated September level at approximately 85%. And the 85% refers to our weekday service level, and then weekend service levels have not been impacted by this event. So you can get a sense when you compare it to the March 2020 bar, which is or column, which is the one immediately to the left in the lighter blue. You can see that we've made significant progress back toward that level, but aren't getting back to that full level of service. Moving to the left across the bars, going about 4 bars to the left or columns to the left, the level of service we'll be operating in September is roughly equivalent to the level that we were operating at in September of 2018, which was the service change immediately prior to launching the Swift Green Line, which came online in the spring of 2019. So it is a substantial reduction in service over pre-COVID levels, but it doesn't go that far back in terms of our history as an agency and the level of service we operated on the road. The rest of the chart, I want to just highlight what you're seeing is some context for how this compares with previous major adjustments in our service levels. And moving from left to right, beginning in that September 2008 service change, that was when we, our pre-recession level of service prior to the Great Recession, also our highest ridership as an agency. We had $4 gas prices, which really pushed things to a peak in 2008. We then launched the Swift Blue Line and reached our peak in that November 2009 service change, and held that for 2 service changes before having to reduce service in the middle of 2010. And that was when you may recall, we eliminated all Sunday service, became a 6-day operation, cut over 80,000 hours of fixed route bus service. That we were able to hold until it became obvious during the Great Recession that we had to make further course correction to maintain sustainability, a second major round of cuts in February of 2012. And so that's that next major drop, again, about an 80,000 hour reduction in service levels, and our real low point in terms of this period, just over 280,000 hours of service on the road. We then began building back, and were able to restore in 2015 Sunday service. And so that's that first big step up. And then shortly after that passed the Prop 1 revenue measure, and have been on a steady path since then in delivering those higher levels of services that we promised Really the only limitation on the pace of that growth has been our capacity as an agency to get that service out the door and on the road. So wanted to provide some of that context. What does this mean? Yes, it is a step back, but really being mitigated heavily by the strategies that we've identified earlier in terms of this level of reserve spending and finding other cost savings within our structure in order to help mitigate the depth of the cut. So it does give us this ability to react in the future, either upward or downward, and the goal will be to preserve as much of our ridership as possible as people come back to the system. We are, the final thing I'll highlight with this chart is wanting to be mindful of safety on the system and the new awareness around social distancing and the loads that we're carrying on our vehicles. And so that's part of the reason as well that you continue to see a level of service that is more in keeping with our recent history while ridership remains quite low. We are expecting a significant bump in ridership in the fall as people come back to work, but we're expecting that to be significantly below historic levels. But we also understand the need to ensure safety on our vehicles. So we'll continue to monitor both the ridership and the level of distancing that we're able to achieve on our vehicles, and that's going to really play into future service level decisions as we move forward.
Thanks, Roland. Next slide, please, Rachel. So this slide has a lot of information on it. It's probably the newest information in addition to the service levels that we have shared because we've been working on it in the past couple of weeks. It really provides more detail about what some of those other strategies are. And then what I like about it is it shows some comparison to the scale of the impact in each of those areas. So what you see in the left half of the table is the different types of strategies, and I'll walk you through a few of those. On the right side, you see the impacts in 2020, 2021, and then the out years. We look at that because of that gap that Roland was showing you in the slides he was showing. I want to point out that 2020 is a partial year assumed for most of those reductions. So if we know the full cost in 2021, we back that into a partial reduction in 2020. It's a mix of one-time and ongoing savings, and some of them are still kind of works in progress. But what you'll see on the left is the first section is service reductions. That's that section that Roland was talking about in the pie chart that talks about what's the impact if we go to an 85% service level. And that's captured there in the service reduction section. The next section is reserves. That was the one where I was talking about the decisions we've made and the funds we've accumulated in our reserves allow us to do a one-time savings of $85.5 million. It's significant. It's the highest reduction or impact decision we've made for the 2020 year. Really helps us not only in 2020, but in the next year and the out years. Just a couple of examples in that area. We have maintained for the past number of years a $5 million fuel reserve. Fuel costs are significantly lower than we had budgeted for this year. And so we felt comfortable reducing that $5 million down to zero for 2020 with the understanding and assumption that we would build that back up over time. Those are the kind of decisions we're making. If we have excess capacity, I think workers' comp is another good example. We are maintaining our statutory requirement in terms of funding workers' comp, but we're making reductions in additional funding that we were putting into that, and mindful of kind of our fiscal integrity, but the ability to pull out some of those funds from reserves. The next category is capital projects and program. Couple of comments here. We're able to look at both our bus and van pool purchases for the current year, the next year, and then subsequent years. As you know, when we do service planning, we need to look out in advance well enough to be able to order the vehicles. We have reduced ridership in our van pool program, which has allowed us to just, I think in the last week or so, cancel a purchase of new vans in our van pool program. And similarly, we've had some discussions this past couple of weeks about canceling one of our current bus orders. Those decisions are made with safety in mind, so we need to be sure that we have the adequate capacity to operate our vehicles within their kind of accepted life and maintenance routine. Those are the kind of decisions that have involved quite a few people making some decisions. Capital projects is another example. We're continuing to look at all of our capital projects. And just one example there, shows how fast this thing has evolved. Several months ago, we decided to advance a project. It's putting LED lights in our park and ride lots. We decided to advance that project because at the time we thought we had excess capacity and the revenue to make that project happen in 2020 instead of 2021 when it was originally scheduled. We included the funding for that to move it forward in the budget amendment that the Finance Committee just recently reviewed and that you'll be looking at later today. So in that span of time, we have now had the COVID response and seen a decrease in our revenue. That is an example of one of those projects that we're going to recommend holding off on. We won't cancel it altogether, but we certainly don't plan to move forward with it in 2020. And that allows us to capture some of those savings, even though we will have the project later. So it's just an example of the kind of decisions we're making. In terms of additional strategies, that's also a large area that we're looking at. It's everything from our travel and training. I think you may know we've suspended travel and training throughout the year, except for what is legally required for safety reasons. We have a number of professional pools and we're scaling back on use of that. We have scaled back on our agency events and that really has to do more with social distancing, but there are some savings there. We have just today, I believe, announced the option for a number of voluntary separation tools that we can use to minimize the impact or the need for any involuntary separations. They were fairly popular in the Great Recession when we offered those. I think you've probably seen in the news a number of other companies and agencies offering the same. And so it's a good tool for us and we expect to see in the next week or two some interest in that. One that I skipped is the selective hiring freeze. That has been going on for a number of months now, and we continue to take a look at any vacancies and really think through, you know, how can we accomplish what we need to can we freeze the position and still accomplish what we need to? Let me see, I'm just checking my notes here. That's all I intended to cover, other than just again to draw your attention to the amount in the 2020 column for reserves. That really does help us buffer the need to make further cuts in other areas. So glad we were able to have that buffer to draw upon. Next slide, please, Rachel. So really next steps, you'll continue to see all of this work will continue. Every month we get another sales tax report, the closer we are to really kind of understanding the impact. We may not know the depth and duration of a recession, but we certainly can see the impact on our ability to deliver service this year and into next year. The type of decisions that you'll see, you know, some decisions come to you, some don't. They're more operational. What we're hoping in this kind of presentation is to give you an example of kind of the complete picture of what we're looking at. The decisions that you will be making this year include likely another budget amendment that will follow the one you're voting on today. And really what we anticipate is a budget amendment where we bring in both revenue and expenditure changes that reflect some of that work we've been doing on these strategies. We're also just kicking off the development of the 2021 budget. That work will go through both the Finance Committee and the board. And that's where we expect to really dig a little deeper in terms of the 2021 savings that we think we need to see. And then late this year, you should expect to see an update in our 6-year plan called the Transit Development Plan. So I'm going to stop and take a breath and then ask if you have any questions.
Any questions at all from the board? Okay, go ahead, Director Beardsley, if you have some more.
Actually, that is the end of the presentation.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your patience.
Thank you, and I appreciate the, I think I had asked about that fuel reserves last time. I appreciate your thoughts on that. I think that's some good low-hanging fruit. You know, it may not be that certainly doesn't come close to solving all the problems, but at least it does some. So thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Okay, that brings us to a presentation on link connections at Northgate, and I believe Sabina will be sharing this with us, and I'll give you the floor, Sabina.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
I can, yep, we can hear you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Sabina Araya with the Planning Department. As we just held the public hearing at the beginning of this meeting, we wanted to give you a brief update on our outreach process in this second phase of our Northgate Link Extension Regional Bus Light Rail Integration Project. That's a mouthful. The second slide gives you an overview of our timeline. As you recall, we first went to our customers and the public at the end of last year, November, December of 2019, with ideas for connecting Snohomish County commuter service to Link at Northgate. Sarah Hayden presented the results of that outreach effort, along with the detailed refined proposal for phase 2 at your April 2nd board meeting. Our initial comment period for this phase 2 started with that presentation and was initially scheduled through beginning of May. But with COVID-19 situations and the conditions of the pandemic, it was suggested that we extend that outreach period by an additional 30 days, and we've done so. Thus incorporating the public hearing at your June meeting today. The next slide is a brief reminder of what would change if the proposal is approved and implemented, and what remains the same. So as a reminder, Community Transit 800 series buses would connect to Link at Northgate. Sound Transit routes 511, 512, and 513 would also connect to Link at Northgate, while Community Transit 400 series buses would still provide service, direct bus service to downtown, and Sound Transit Route 510 that Joe mentioned earlier would provide direct service from Everett to downtown. And the 510 change or proposal was different than in the phase 1, and it was partially a result of the feedback that was received. And both agencies are now, as I'll touch briefly at the end, will reconsider our proposal in light of our current situation. The next slide outlines our efforts in this 60-day public outreach phase. We focused our efforts online, and we had our online open house. The proposal and associated survey have been available, and on the Community Transit's own website, we had a dedicated web page that linked to that site. So we had multiple ways that people could reach our online open house. We had a press release, onboard handouts, social media and website updates, email notifications to our riders, and the presentations that we had planned to city councils have been replaced by packets sent out for review. The next slide shows you a brief update on the status of our online survey and the feedback we have received so far. So far, the online open house saw a traffic of over 3,000 visits, over or close to 400 survey responses, both completed and partial. As of this morning, since this presentation was put together last week, as of this morning, that number was a little over 500 surveys, either completed or partial. So we had a great response. Phase 1 had about 1,400 either completed or partial surveys. We also had a number of write-in comments that we will, at the end of this timeline, process and summarize and provide those to you. Preliminary feedback that we've seen is consistent for the service for UW riders and U District riders. Pretty consistent with the feedback that we received in phase 1. which is the majority of them feel that the proposal meets their travel needs, and they would plan to use Link as a transfer point. The last slide will present our next steps. Since we're kind of shifting to planning for the near future in September of this year and March of next year, and then seeing how that could affect our proposal for September 2021. So after today's public meeting, the comment period closes tonight, and we'll be able to provide to you in the next few weeks with a full summary of both outreach efforts and all comments received. As Roland had mentioned, there's a great deal of effort dedicated to look at service levels, both on the community transit and Sound Transit side, to see what we can afford to provide, how ridership is impacting the demand for service. We do still think that integration with Link at Northgate is still important and recommend continuing with planning for it, but we'll defer a final decision until later in the year, and we'll come back to you with what our findings are and a final proposal for your approval. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. That concludes my brief update.
Thank you, Sabina. Appreciate it. Any questions from board members? Okay, appreciate that. We will go to, I'm sorry, did somebody speak?
No, I just said thank you.
Oh, thank you. Okay. We'll go to committee reports then. I will begin with the executive committee. Executive committee met on Thursday, May the 28th. Our CEO, Emmett Heath, provided his CEO report, which included a COVID-19 status and actions update. The next executive committee meeting is scheduled for Thursday, June 18th, and that will take place at 11:30 a.m. Next is Finance, Performance, and Oversight Committee. Councilmember Mike Todd.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Finance, Performance, and Oversight Committee met on Thursday, May 21st. It was attended by Tom Merrill, Jan Schweddy, and I. The consent agenda today has the approval of April 2020 expenditures and payroll. They're items B through G. The action item also has one item, the approval of resolution number 03-20, amending the 2020 budget. Mary Albert will be giving a brief summary of the second amendment to the 2020 budget later on in the meeting. The committee does recommend approval of the resolution. In your packet, you have a standard report for the April sales tax report. As Jerry said early, overall for the year, we're doing well, but things are starting to head down. The report reflects purchases made in February 2020. So in April, we collected approximately $9.9 million in sales tax revenue, approximately $700,000 less than budgeted. So, but however, due to the strong sales tax collections early in the year, we're still favorable year to date, $1.9 million, but that's temporary. We also had a diesel fuel report year to date through April 2020. Community Transit paid an average of $1.52 per gallon for diesel fuel compared to the 2020 budget amount of $2.25, a positive variance of 73 cents per gallon. And of course, we're using quite a bit less with reduced service levels. Next meeting of our committee will be scheduled for 2:00 p.m. Thursday, June 18th. Thank you. No further report.
Thank you, Councilmember Todd. Strategic Alignment and Capital Development Committee, Mayor Leonard Kelly.
Thank you, Chairman Nearing. The Strategic Alignment and Capital Development Committee meeting was held on Wednesday, May 20th. The meeting was attended by myself, Labor Representative Norton, Mayor Smith, and Councilmember Todd. The committee heard job order number 2018-092-07, Cash Park Operating Base Painting. This project was later postponed. Consent items, there are no consent items on today's agenda. There are also no action items on today's or were heard. Informational items, staff reported on outreach efforts for proposed regional bus and light rail integration in Northgate in fall of 2021. This presentation and the public hearing for comments took place earlier in today's meeting. The committee heard a briefing on the Swift Blue Line extension. Materials for this item can be found in today's board packet. The committee was advised of agenda topics for the June 2020 meeting, and our next scheduled meeting of the Strategic Alignment and Capital Development Committee is Wednesday, June 18th at 2 p.m. Thank you.
Thank you. That brings us to the consent calendar. And does anybody wish to pull any of those items for further discussion? If
Move
not,
to
we'll open the
approve.
floor for any potential motion.
Move to approve.
Second.
Moved by Mayor Kelly, seconded by Councilmember Todd to approve the consent calendar. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Chair votes aye. Any opposed? Motion passes. Thank you. And we have one action item today. This would be resolution number 3-20. And Mary Albert will be presenting on this, I believe.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So every year, Community Transit amends the budget at least twice. This is the second of two, probably three mid-year budget amendments. As Jerry mentioned, we'll probably have a third budget amendment coming in early fall to address some of the COVID-19 related changes that are needed to our budget. This amendment rolls over unexpended project budgets and adjusts beginning cash. It also adds funding for several additional items. One is additional paratransit services in the general fund. We also are including two projects, funding for the transit facility LED upgrades and Swift Orange Line project development. It also moves an existing budget for the MCOB hoist repair and replacement from the reserve fund into the facilities and technology fund, and it merges it into the facilities master plan project. Also, we have funds set aside in the facilities and technology fund 48 for the facilities master plan project, and we're asking for additional appropriations for phases 1 and 2 of that project. Does anybody have any questions?
I have one, Mary. On item 4, where it says the transit facilities LED upgrades project, I thought we just heard from Jerry that that was postponed or canceled.
Yes, I think Jerry can explain it a little bit better, but at the time this amendment was put together, we believe that this was going to go forward.
Correct. So we will not be spending money on that project in 2020, and that was a decision just made in the past couple of weeks. So the committee had already voted to move this amendment to the full board, and so we left it as is, knowing we can come back and correct it. But
Okay.
that's one of those projects we'll push out.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
This is Councilmember Todd.
Councilmember Daughtry.
Oh, go ahead.
Councilmember Daughtry, and then we'll go to you, Councilmember Todd.
Thank you.
The question I have about the LED lights is there not enough of a savings realized for going forward with the capital improvement for the LED lights?
I'm actually going to let Roland speak to that since he's got this in his capital projects program.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there is, Councilmember Daughtry, there is a significant savings due to the conversion to LED, although it is something that would take a number of years to realize. You know, obviously it's going to be a number of years in terms of paying back the complete cost of the project. It was really the priority was on providing some near-term relief in terms of cash flow on the program. It's something that capital staff advised we could easily defer. And we're not in danger of, in terms of our state of good repair of those facilities. It will continue to be a priority, and we'll probably be back on the agenda within the next year or two, I would imagine.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Todd.
Yeah, thank you. Along that same vein, so I think what we're talking about here is for expediency and to get the budget amendment done, which has some elements that were required. we're going to go ahead with the way it was presented a couple of weeks ago and approved by our committee. But we are going to start keeping a bunch of sticky notes off to the side of changes that are going to happen in the third budget amendment later on in the year. I presume when we've got different insights into our revenue and maybe other projects. And I'm okay with that. I think we're just saying that we're putting the capacity in there, but we're not going to do these projects. My question would be, we've talked about the LED project. Are there other projects we've also put on pause for that same cash flow reason or staff time reason? Or is it just that one element?
Probably the easiest one to talk about is the item that went through the SADC committee and got pulled from today's agenda, which was painting at Cash Park. That was another one where we need to do that project for our state of good repair, but we can do it next year. And so again, we decided after it had gone through committee that that one would not go forward and we would pause on it until next year. Roland, do you have other examples?
I would just say in general that this process of continuing to comb through the capital program will continue for some weeks. So yeah, those are two early examples, but we really do continue to evaluate both projects that could be put on hold or canceled, and also adjustment to scope in other projects that are moving forward. So I would expect more on this. It's just, I think the primary message is staff are really taking a refined look at the overall capital program, and I would expect to have further adjustments as we move through the year.
So is it really necessary to do a budget amendment right now when we have some other things that we know are going to be coming forward and we've already had changes to it before we've even approved the amendment?
So our preference is to have you move forward with the budget amendment. There are a number of items that we have budgeted and put the funds in reserve, and we need to move the funds in order to spend them. The hoist project is an example where we had already budgeted for that project. We just need to move the funds in order to move forward with that project. That's a project that really impacts our capacity to work on vehicles, as we've added more of the longer buses and vehicles. We need to upgrade our hoists. And so, yes, I would say that for the short term, we would prefer that you move forward with the understanding that we'll continue to brief you as we're looking at these projects.
Okay, thank you, Jerry. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Mr. Chair, may I follow up?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. So I appreciate that staff is looking at this carefully. I think that I think you're making the right decisions. I think we're in each of our own jurisdictions, we're looking at, if you have staff capacity and you have a good bidding climate, even though times may be tight, maybe you want to be a little riskier in terms of your reserves and at least think about the consequence of putting things off so that we don't have too many projects next year to do, because too many projects at one time is a mind share kind of issue. So I think you're doing that appropriately. Just want to make sure that we don't get penny wise and pound foolish here and miss out on opportunities on good bids for things. We have been getting good bids. Hate to have that. Hate to see a steep cliff in the future. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. If there's no final comments, we'll go ahead and open the floor for any potential motion on 320.
Mr. Chair, I'd be happy to make a motion.
Okay, go ahead, Councilmember Todd.
I make a motion that the Board of Directors approve the proposed amendments to the 2020 budget as presented in Resolution 03-20.
Second.
Moved by Councilmember Todd, seconded by Councilmember Daughtry to approve Resolution 03-20. Is there any final comment? All in favor then?
Aye.
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 Chair votes aye. Any opposed? The motion passes. Thank you. That brings us to the chair's report, and they're actually the only report I have is that the next regularly scheduled board meeting is July 2nd at 3 p.m. This is noteworthy because it's the Thursday before the 4th of July weekend, which will include July 3rd through the 5th. So we are expecting action items and ask that board members who are not able to participate in this July meeting, if you could please notify staff at your earliest convenience, just to ensure that we can get a quorum at that meeting, should there be a number of folks that have other plans. Thank you for that. And is there a CEO report, Director Behe, or did you cover everything? Oh, go ahead, Deb.
Yeah, so this is Deb Osborne. I think there were just a few to touch on, as he traditionally does, reports out on partnership activities. Believe it or not, there's a high volume of external meetings, virtual these days, but a lot of engagement with the community still, even in the virtual environment. Last Friday, May 29th, at the invitation of Executive Summers and Dr. Chris Bitters, Emmett was interviewed regarding the COVID response and from a transportation perspective. I understand this is a twice weekly recording, different community members, stakeholders reporting out on the COVID response. So that was well received. We continue to meet twice, sometimes three times a week with the Mobility Partnership. Emmett's reported on this group before. Regional transportation CEOs and general managers, they're meeting to just discuss the COVID crisis, increasingly transitioning to those longer term strategic conversations, much along the lines of what you heard Roland and Jerry speak to financially, and also with an eye toward customer needs and concerns as customers, businesses start reopening, riders start returning to the system. What kinds of things are we going to need to have in place regionally for that to work well? Good transition. Next Monday, right around the corner, Roland and Emmett will be presenting to the Shoreline City Council on the Swift Blue Line expansion project, which I understand you have materials on in your packet today. And that's just an update, partnership, giving them a thorough understanding of where we are with the project and the preferred alternative for that project. And speaking of the Swift Blue Line, while not a final announcement yet, any little smidge of good news is always nice to announce, and that is that the PSRC is conducting their regional CMAQ, and that's the Congestion Mitigation and Air Quality grant funding process, along with the Surface Transportation Program. And we have been recommended for, the Swift Blue Line has been recommended for $3.2 million in grant funding for that project. So that is great news, but it's not done yet. And Councilmember Todd can probably speak as much to this as I can, but that will now go through the Transportation Policy Board and the Executive Board at the PSRC for final approval, sometime late July, I think. So we're pleased with that, to be considered and make the list of recommended projects. Not much new in DC. There is a stimulus package. There was one passed in the House on May 15th called the HEROES Act, but no significant movement in the Senate on that same bill. Yesterday, we learned that the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee released what they call Invest in America Act, and this is to fix America's surface transportation, and digging into that today and in the coming weeks to find out more. It does contain a considerable investment for public transportation, including money for our capital investment program that we rely on for grant funding. And then the only other thing I would add is that while we don't know if there will be a special session, a state session, it is possible. And so we are prepared. We have a short list of items. Should the state reconvene even for a day or two, we are ready to advocate for just a small subset of issues that we hope to see promoted. So I think that's all we had in the rest of Emmett's report. So
excellent. Thank you, Deb.
Sure.
We will go to board communication then. Councilmember Daughtry.
I have nothing to report. Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Kelly.
Nothing, thank you.
Oh, and I apologize. Councilmember Merrill is not on anymore, is he? He's on my sheet here, but we had an alternate, did we not, Rachel?
Yes, Chair. The alternate is Councilmember Mike Gallagher.
That's right. Councilmember Gallagher.
Tom did not report anything to me to report to you.
Thank you. Thanks for filling in. Councilmember Nearing.
No report. Thank you.
Thank you. Labor Rep Norton.
Nothing to report.
Okay, thank you. And Councilmember Schweddy.
Nothing. Deb answered the only question I had.
Mayor Smith.
No report, thank you.
Councilmember Todd.
Yes, thank you. The Transportation Policy Board meeting for next week for June has been canceled. But as Deb reported earlier, there will be a meeting in July. And she's correct that the agency did a great job of working through the whole process. He recommended for some money through the RPEC, which continues to work really hard on behalf of transit agency. And I think all of our city folks are also working on some surface transportation funds that will come through that. So the Transportation Policy Board will be acting on that in July, probably Executive Board the week after that. There is a meeting next week of what's called the Transit Caucus. It's the Transit Policy Board reps from the transit agencies. And we're going to start the conversation about an educational program on how transit funding works in the Puget Sound area. It became an interesting discussion and debate at a meeting a couple of months ago at the Executive Board, where new money was coming to the area. Good news for the area in general, but some misunderstandings about how that money was distributed. And several of us, including PSRC staff, are going to work on how we educate people how the system works before people start monkeying with the formula to the detriment of everyone. So we'll keep you appraised on that and how that works. And Melissa Colley's doing a great job of supporting us on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Wright.
No report today, thank you.
Thank you. I believe I got everybody. Did I miss anybody? Okay. We have no need of an executive session. Is there any other business related to the corporation that needs to be addressed at today's meeting? If not, we'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Mayor Kelly, seconded by Mayor Smith to adjourn the meeting. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Aye. Opposed? Okay, the motion passes. Thank you all for coming, and thank you staff for your work, and we will see you either at the next committee meeting, next board meeting, or something else. Thanks, everybody. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.